Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Hinata Joined the Akatsuki for Naruto Part 2. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
He was still off balance after a merciless ramen-eating frenzy and general thrashing he gave Choji. The unease was slowly eating away at him, especially given the circumstances and memories. Naruto was well aware of the Akatsuki's capabilities, but a small voice in his head, which he assumed was his subconscious, told him they'd grown much stronger. How else could they have gotten in without detection? How indeed, a dark voice said, chuckling slightly. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he realized what had happened before returning to normalcy. I don't need your help, Demon Fox, Naruto exclaimed angrily. Really? Exclaimed the Kyuubi, his words echoing within his mental prison. I'm sure, Naruto said confidently. But you're perplexed, aren't you? You're wondering if they're close, if they came in numbers, their strengths, or better yet. The Kyuubi laughed demonically. Does any one of your friends have died yet? Shut up, they're all fine, none of them were hurt. Naruto mentally yelled. However, the Kyuubi simply laughed off the anger. Ah, you should know, brat, your anger only serves to feed me and give me even more freedom. The Kyuubi said slyly. However, brat, it appears you misread my intentions. Really? Naruto said, calming himself down and refusing to let the demon rile him up any further. They're close, brat, the Kyuubi murmured darkly. He had no choice but to listen to the dark entity because he had no other information. What exactly do you mean? Naruto grumbled angrily. He despised it when the Kyuubi kept secrets from him like this. I cannot pinpoint their whereabouts, numbers, or strengths. The Kyuubi said slowly and thoughtfully to keep Naruto guessing. I can determine, however, that they are indeed strong, very angry ... and have walked the path you are currently walking away from. Naruto spun around, his eyes darting left and right to see if he could spot anyone. The Kyuubi laughed loudly at his prison's antics, which irritated Naruto even more. My, you are vigilant, Kyuubi said mockingly. I would have said they were behind you if they were indeed there, wouldn't I? Kyuubi said, deeply condescendingly. Stop playing with me, Naruto exclaimed, frustrated by the beast inside him's complete lack of information and utility. I don't play, brat. Such trivialities are for mortals, and I, on the other hand, am so much more. The Kyuubi said with great personal satisfaction, the one you seek has walked this path. But it occurred some time ago, the Kyuubi knowing Naruto missed one of the key points. You shouldn't look down on humans because it was one of us who imprisoned you in the first place, Naruto reflected, a slight grin on his hero and role model, the fourth Hokage. Humph, sighs the Kyuubi irritably. How long have they been here? Naruto inquired. The Kyuubi laughed slowly before responding airily. Oh, perhaps a day or so. So they can be anywhere in Konoha by ... Wait, did you say there was only one of them? Naruto asked, perplexed. Before falling silent, the Kyuubi laughed long and loudly. You stated that you don't know their phone numbers ... What else do you know? Silence. Who are these people? Again, silence. Answer me, damn it, roared Naruto mentally. He overheard a hearty laugh. You'll probably find out tomorrow, brat, the Kyuubi said quietly, remaining silent. The next day was similar, with Naruto first sleeping poorly and then spending hours in his room pondering various possibilities for the intruder's identity and whereabouts. Unfortunately, these were mostly off the mark, with each idea being more ridiculous than the last. Why the hell would they want to attack the flower shop? Yelled Naruto, tossing a scroll containing patterns and conclusions away from him. Damn, this was so Shikamaru's thing. Naruto grumbled before returning to his bed. She had arrived ... She had arrived. So many years had passed, and her constant dreams and nightmares all revolved around this one place where she could see and sometimes even hear. The Hyuga estate, her residence. She moved forward just enough to touch the doors. It was extremely nostalgic. It was old, but it was still expensive. She was well aware that it had existed long before her parents, or even her grandparents were born. She gently pushed it open, fully aware of the security seals that would alert the Hyuga to a trespasser, or anyone with a non-Hyuga background. All the better for her. She activated her bloodline and discovered that the compound was nearly empty. Almost empty, as she sensed one other person within, someone small. The main members of the Hyuga branch were usually around Konoha with security and defense of the village as a whole, while the branch members were on some sort of official business within and beyond Konoha. Her father was most likely visiting the daimyo of the Fire Country. Her father, she mused briefly. She hadn't even begun to consider what he would say to her right now. Will he accept her with open arms? Doubtful, she thought to herself, her neutrality practiced. Look at her with disgust and insignificance. That's more likely, she thought bitterly before turning to her cloak and reaching a better conclusion. Assail her as an enemy and a traitor. After all, it was his responsibility as the head of the household to protect Konoha. She sighed. Her thoughts were distracting her, and she'd be gone by the time he arrived. She felt more nostalgia rise as she walked into the main courtyard and looked at the buildings, but no longing, and the place, though familiar, gave her no peace of mind. She entered the main halls and marveled at their grandeur. Marble, antique and pricey furniture and rugs, scrolls and markings surrounded her, just as they had 3 years before. It appeared that redecorating was beyond the hyuga. She had ringed herself with seals and a reasonable illusionary technique to ward off unwanted eyes, fully aware that a hyuga would easily spot her, and had decided to deactivate it. In that vein, when she opened her eyes again, the person had not moved, and she was having difficulty recalling the person. She was getting closer to her destination. She peered into the first room to her right, which she remembered belonged to her sister if it hadn't been moved. Thankfully, it was gone though changed. It was exactly as she remembered it. Having been taught proper etiquette since the age of 3, all hyuga were expected to behave civilized and formal in nearly every conceivable way. However, the room appeared to have changed to that of a genin, with numerous jitsu scrolls, parchments, and books neatly placed and ordered on a shelf or desk, indicating that the occupant had only briefly left the room. As she moved forward, she came to her own room. She hesitated to grab the handle. She frequently had dreams in which she returned to her home and opened her door to feel safe and secure within its familiar surroundings, not in some cave, wondering if she'd lost her mind due to incarceration. She used her Byakugan to see inside. Whoever had occupied her room was now in there, but apparently facing the opposite direction, which was better if she had to kill them. She opened the door and entered quietly, as was customary for shinobi, and similarly closed it behind her. Her eyes widened slightly as she examined the contents of her room. It had not changed at all. It was exactly as she had left it 2 years before. Someone had apparently come in and dusted and cleaned it on occasion, and her suspicion was linked to the other occupant of the room. She's turned into a proper kunoichi, she thought. Her younger sister was kneeling in front of a small table, hands clasped in prayer, 2 sticks of incense burning on each side of a picture frame with flowers gently placed in front of it. The photograph depicted a young Hinata hyuga. It's nice to know she remembers me, she thought as she remembered when the photo was taken. Hanabi lowered her hands and quietly said, "Happy birthday, Nai-chan." The Akatsuki had little sympathy for the sentiment ... but he still felt something. "I am sorry father cannot be here. He is away on official business with the daimyo ... Well, nothing has really changed in Konoha. I met your old teammates this morning, they provided the flowers. Not really much has happened within the family either," she continued, putting her arms behind her for a suitable stand. "Neji Nisan may begin teaching in the academy," she continued, putting her arms behind her for a suitable stand. "Neji Nisan. Naruto-kun is training Hanabi." Her eyes widened. That's not like Hayashi to trust someone outside the clan to train a hyuga, the other occupant thought. "But you know him ... His training is a bit excessive, for lack of a better word," she said with a light chuckle. "But I feel father trusted him for a reason, and for that matter I can trust him to make me stronger, just like he made you," she said, her voice breaking and putting her hand to wipe a tear. "We all miss you Hinata Nai-chan," she said, her voice breaking and putting her hand to wipe a tear. "Oh?" Hanabi gasped, and her bloodline almost reflexively activated to see everything around her, and the source of the voice, realizing it came from behind her. But an odd jitsu prevented her from knowing directly with her normal vision. "Akatsuki," she thought, shocked and terrified. In one fluid motion, she wiped her eyes and spun into the Jukin fighting stance. "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" she demanded, unable to determine gender or origin from the voice, the black cloak and straw hat concealing their identity. But those 2 factors alone screamed hostile. The Akatsuki remained silent, their hats slightly lowered to cover their face. "Your choice," Hanabi grumbled. Reaching behind her in her pouch, which she always wore as a precaution, she drew 2 shuriken and tossed them before charging forward. "We are hyuga, and we know no fear," her father taught her as she dashed the 12 feet between herself and the cloaked assailant. As the shuriken screeched towards them, the Akatsuki remained motionless, the shuriken landing harmlessly on the wooden floor. Hanabi ignored this because she knew that despite the Akatsuki's strange and mysterious abilities, nothing could save them from the gentle fist techniques. Nothing could protect them if they were even slightly nicked by them. The consequences would be disastrous, if not fatal. Her father explained how armor, no matter how thick, was no barrier, and Neji Nyai-san once described dispatching a foe behind several inches of concrete. Hanabi thrust her right palm into the Akatsuki's chest, who simply avoided the attack by moving her elbow slightly to the right. She spun around and brought her left hand in the shape of a spike aimed at the opponent's heart, but the attack was again avoided by moving her arm so that she hit nothing but the air above their shoulder. She backed off and charged again, this time unleashing a flurry of fatal blows, each aimed at none of the obvious fatal points of the body, in an attempt to throw the opponent off balance and trick them into thinking they can ignore the damage. But her assailant didn't ignore it. Whenever a blow came near them, they evaded it as if it were the simplest thing in the world, and each time with the least amount of effort using only one hand possible. What is going on? She cleared the space between them and the enemy. She was getting tired, but looking at the adversary, despite the fact that their hat was lowered, showed no signs of fatigue. It appeared that it was second nature to them. They appeared completely at ease, their chakra signature glowing strong as before she attacked. But she saw something her eyes hadn't seen before. There was kindness, acceptance, a brutal sense of anger, and a demonically large intent to kill, all while maintaining a calm and cool stature. Perhaps a change in strategy was required. This would be a difficult dodge in such a confined space, and it would be something they couldn't move out of the way. She moved her left arm and allowed her left palm to hover slightly over her right as she focused and gathered her chakra. Close combat wasn't the only thing the Hyuga knew after all. She drew her left arm back and thrust her right arm forward, releasing the chakra she was gathering. Hak Kyusho, she yelled, aiming at the foe. The attack had all of the properties of Juken but had a longer range. The charge was its only disadvantage. So she reasoned. The Akatsuki didn't just stand there, but could feel the energy coming and moved with unnatural speed and agility, as if they didn't have any bones to speak of as they weaved over and under the attack, bringing themselves 2 feet from the young Hyuga. Hanabi was taken aback, and she thrust her right arm immediately. The Akatsuki not only avoided the blow, but quickly moved around it, bringing them almost back to back with her. Hanabi's bloodline gave her the ability to see something she didn't recognize. Hanabi noticed a glowing blue line between the thumb and little finger of the Akatsuki's left hand, which increased in size and moved with the consistency of string as the Akatsuki stretched her fingers fully and over their shoulder. She was too slow to prevent what happened next. The string was pulled over her head, and the Akatsuki clasped her fingers together, allowing it to pass cleanly through Hanabi's neck. Naruto was walking down the path he always took to the ramen shop, perhaps drowning his worries in a steaming bowl of noodles. On the way, he saw 2/3 of the rest of Team 8. As he approached the couple and giant dog, he decided ramen could wait a few moments. "Hey Kiba, Shino," Naruto said, waving at them with one hand as he approached them slowly. They both turned to face him. "Hey," Kiba said cheerfully as usual. "Good morning, Naruto," Shino replied calmly and collectedly. Akamaru ran up to him and thoroughly licked him on the face, making him laugh at the torrents of drool on his face. "Down, boy," he exclaimed, finally pushing the massive dog away and wiping his face. "Okay, I really need to wash now, Databeo," he says as he walks to a nearby fountain to wash the inch-thick layer of dog spit off his face. Kiba laughed, scratching behind Akamaru's ear. "Live with him and you'd get used to it." "So, where are you two going?" Naruto asked, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "I'm on my way home," Kiba says, pointing with his thumb down a path to his right. "I need to practice a technique I was working on, so I'm heading to training ground 7, Shino said in his usual tone, turning his head and beginning to move. 7 huh? Naruto chuckled lightly and folded his arms. Shino came to a halt and slowly turned to face Naruto, saying, "Indeed." Naruto nodded, knowing the location's hidden meaning. Hinata used to practice there. Kiba, who had missed this, simply chose this moment to add his input to the conversation. "Well, I'll see you two later. My mom wants to talk to me. Something about getting Akamaru neutered," Kiba said lightly, causing Akamaru to lie flat and place his front paws over his face. Kiba smiled as he looked at him. "Oh, common, I was kidding." Akamaru grumbled. "Yes, I know that's going too far," he admitted, bored. Akamaru growled once more. "Yes, I would not like it if someone said it to me," Kiba said, still bored but slightly impatient. Akamaru growled once more before rising to his feet. "You wouldn't dare," Kiba warned. Akamaru dashed down the path leading to Kiba's house at full speed. "Hey, don't you dare crap on my bed," Kiba yelled and bolted, leaving the remaining pair mentally questioning the dogs or the owner's training. Naruto began slowly walking to the ramen shop before saying, "Well, see you around, Shino," in a less cheerful tone. He had only taken a few steps when he heard Shino's voice. "You are not to blame." Naruto came to a halt and turned slowly to face the bug user. "Say again." he cautioned. You know full well the blame was not yours. You sent your shadow clones. I sent my furthest longest living bugs for miles in every conceivable direction. And neither achieved anything except you nearly dying due to chakra exhaustion and I losing every insect I sent. No information was gathered on either part. No information was gathered on either part, Shino asked, his voice not showing any elation. Naruto approached him again, this time face to face. You weren't there, and I don't recall you being there. You didn't see the blood. You didn't see me do nothing. And you didn't see me running away like a coward when I heard her screaming. He spat bitterly, staring directly at the bug user's goggles, and apparently the bug user staring back at Naruto. I have the power of the damned Kyuubi inside me. And I did nothing. He said the last few, not all of the 10 knew his secret, but those who did not reject him, but instead admired Naruto as a shinobi of incredible fortitude. The only people he didn't tell were Ino, Kiba, Lee, Tenten ... and Hinata. Loathing that he didn't tell her everything ... and everything he should have told her when she had the chance ... not realizing how much she meant to him before she vanished. Don't let the past consume you, Naruto. It will only lead to your downfall as the future Hokage, Shino said wisely. Let two precious people down and you'll see how it feels, Shino, Naruto said as he walked away slowly. Shino couldn't help but doubt his ability to not succumb to such emotion if it happened. Temari was in her Nara estate room, going over some paperwork she needed to finish, and she found the Konoha International Communication and Negotiation Bureau just as boring and dull as the one in Suna. Just a few more, she thought to herself, scratching the paper with her pen. She despised this job because it was slow, repetitive, and exhausting, much more so than her previous job as Kunoichi. She set her pen down and stretched her arms above her head to relieve the tension in her back muscles before resting her elbow on her desk for support. She looked at a picture on her desk. He had one hand in his pockets and his other around the small of her back, and she had her arms wrapped around his, and they were both smiling. Shikamaru with his lazy yet knee-unbalancing smirk, and her with the blindingly large, teeth showing, jaw-splitting, eye-closed smiles she found so fun to do around him. She allowed herself to daydream about that day, the location, the foods she remembered eating, the activities they did together. Mind if I assist? A voice from behind her asked sincerely. She cocked her head slightly to the right, knowing exactly who it was. I'm fine. I can do it myself, and you'd probably find it too difficult anyway, she said quietly, smiling. Troublesome woman. If I help, you can be free and we can spend the rest of the afternoon together, Shikamaru teased in her ear, sending shivers down her spine and widening her grin. What exactly do you have in mind? She stated. I'm very interested now. Well, a nap, a few rounds of shogi, a movie, a nice dinner, dancing under the moonlight, he said, wrapping his arms around her neck and kissing her on the cheek. Go on, she chuckled, shamelessly blushing. Watching the sunset or the moon rise, depending on how much time we have, they laughed. Kissing until first light or until my jaw cramps and I start complaining. She laughed loudly and gripped his arms around her before grinning slyly. So ... what are we still waiting for? She laughed, jumped out of her chair, and wrapped her arms around him. Her head snapped up. She sat at the desk, staring at her hand, on which she had rested her head, assuming she had fallen asleep. Looking at the clock on the desk, she noticed that only a few minutes had passed, and turning around in her chair, she was disappointed to find the dark, empty room with her as the sole occupant, remembering what she saw last in her dream. His arms wrapped around her, promising things they would do together. She roughly threw her pen across her room, holding her head and letting her tears flow freely, ignoring the paperwork for the time being. Hanabi screamed as she saw the wire pass through her neck, expecting her head to fall off her shoulders and die. She was relieved when it didn't happen, but horrified by what did. Her vision returned to normal, preventing her from seeing beyond the confines of the room, and despite her best efforts, she was unable to reactivate the Byakugan. What? I can't. Her panic interrupted her thoughts, and something else simply sapped all the energy she seemed to have, leaving her exhausted beyond belief. The Akatsuki was now visible. She swayed slightly but spun around and resumed the Juken stance. I will not give up, she yelled despite having barely enough energy to do so. The Akatsuki just stood there. Hanabi pushed herself to her absolute limit, striking 3 times, and the Akatsuki evaded these as well before moving 3 meters away to stand near the door, leaving Hanabi in the center of the room. The Akatsuki then spread his fingers at Hanabi, who tried to move but seemed completely paralyzed, and then lost all strength in her arms, which fell and dangled at her side, her body completely vertical. What's going on? She wondered briefly, but stopped when she saw the Akatsuki move slowly towards her, and she struggled with all her strength against the unseen force, releasing all the remaining chakra she had through her chakra points to perhaps relive the hold. But it was a futile effort, and she looked on the approaching danger. I'm going to die, Hanabi realized suddenly, but let out a small chuckle. So this is how I end ... That is so pathetic. Hanabi could sense the Akatsuki's intent to kill increasing as he got closer. I'm so sorry, Father, Neji Nyai-san, Naruto-kun, I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough, she told herself, hoping they'd forgive her in the afterlife. Akatsuki extended one arm to the side. We are Hyuga, and we know no fear, Hanabi mentally recited, ironically one of the last Hyuga litanies she was taught as a child. Then he raised the other. The Akatsuki's murderous intent peaked. 2 toes. The Akatsuki stood guard over her. Hanabi shut her eyes. However, there was no metallic sting. There is no burn, no cold, and no shock. There is no pain. Both arms softly folded around her, bringing her forward into a gentle embrace. She was completely perplexed when she heard Akatsuki speak, which began male. It's good to see you again. Then the voice changed to female, taking her breath away. Hanabi-chan, she said softly, lifting her hat to reveal her eyes. Hanabi could barely say anything when she looked up. Hinata, it can't be, Hanabi thought as she stared at her older sister's face. Hinata removed her straw hat and unclipped the top of her cloak, possibly hearing her thoughts. Hanabi exclaimed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Hinata Nyai-sen ... You're alive ... You ... When she saw the slightly older familiar face, her voice broke down completely, and she began crying, tucking her face into her sister's chest. She sobbed uncontrollably, overcome by the incredible joy of seeing a long-lost sibling return from the dead. She cried because she had been away from home for so long. She cried for all the times something painful had happened, and Hinata was the only one who could console her. Her older sister was the one who kept her from becoming a self-centered, ignorant shell of a kunoichi. Her father far too proud and steel-willed for such outward displays of emotion. Hinata didn't push her away. Instead, she held her until she stopped. And Hanabi reverted to the little girl she had been 3 years ago, when she needed her siblings' help more than ever. Looking up, she noticed Hinata appeared unmoved by the situation. Her eyes simply closed slightly and staring at her with an unmasked face. Hinata ... How ... Why? Hanabi asked, having too many questions to begin with. Hinata carefully wiped away her tears with a small cloth before lifting Hanabi into her arms as if she weighed nothing, using one arm to support her legs and the other to support her back as she moved slowly to her own bed. She placed the pillows behind Hanabi's body and head to make her more comfortable. Hanabi was still unable to move when she was placed sitting upright, but she could move her head. Hinata then began to move around the bed and speak. You fought well, Hanabi-chan. There is no dishonor in that, Hinata said without looking at her. You can use the kyuasho. Truly impressive for someone your age, she said appreciatively, but with an odd lack of emotion, reminding Hanabi of her old teammate Shino and the way he spoke. How are you here, Nyai-san? Hanabi asked slowly, the strange technique's effect still leaving her slightly fatigued. Why am I here ... Or why am I still alive? She asked calmly, leaving Hanabi deeply disturbed. I live because I unfortunately did not die, she said calmly, leaving Hanabi deeply disturbed. Unfortunately, she reflected to herself, and I'm here because I want something, Hinata explained quietly. What ... Do you ... Want? Hanabi inquired hesitantly. Hinata looked at her again. Something you can't help me with, she said, looking around her bookshelf for something before pulling out a blue-covered novel with no pictures other than words. Wait. Oh ... And oh ... Hanabi thought to herself, bracing herself for what was about to happen. Hinata flipped through the pages slowly at first, then frantically when something was out of place, until she reached the end and tossed it aside. Using her Byakugan, she searched the entire bookshelf, then the entire room, before turning to face Hanabi, sensing her older sibling's rage growing as her gaze focused on her. Where is it, Hanabi? Hinata asked quietly, her full attention focused on Hanabi. Hanabi began, unsure how to finish her sentence. Where is it, Hanabi? She asked again, almost hissing her name as she moved slowly towards her. The movement was unsettlingly eerie. Hinata moved in a slight zigzag formation, as Hanabi imagined a poisonous serpent would do before striking its prey. But Hanabi couldn't tell if she was walking or hovering near her. Suddenly, she was above her, grabbing her by the front and bringing her face to face. Where is it, Hanabi? She yelled, her bloodline activated. Hanabi's blood ran cold, Hinata's bloodline having grown to the point where she appeared almost demonic. What? Hanabi moaned. The letter, where is it? Snarled Hinata. Hanabi began before pausing in terror. Answer me. Lifting Hanabi off the bed and onto the ground, bringing her face to face. I gave it to Naruto-kun, she finally exclaimed, suddenly unsure if she would live past this day, staring back at the person in front of her, not knowing where or when this form of Hinata had arisen, or if Hinata existed at all. Hinata appeared to be frozen in time, her bloodline retaining a bestial appearance. It vanished, and she returned to the unemotional face she had only moments before, putting Hanabi back down and repositioning her on the bed before turning her back to her. I apologize, Hanabi, Hinata said softly. Hanabi, unsure how to respond, said nothing. Did you read it? Hinata inquired, returning her gaze. Hanabi nodded slowly, unsure if he had made the right decision. Returning my gaze to the bookshelf. I never finished it, Hinata admitted quietly. I know, I gave it to him after you were declared missing, but I just thought Naruto-kun should know the truth, Hanabi said, her eyes welling up with tears. How did he take it? Hinata asked, her interest surprising even her as she sat on the side of the bed, moving closer to dry Hanabi's tears once more. I left him alone ... but I have a good idea. I heard him scream. Hanabi trailed off. Hinata averted her gaze and closed her eyes. She didn't want to hurt him in that way. How is Asuma? Hinata inquired, unsure why she had done so. He is fine. He actually spent a lot of money on missions to find you, Hanabi said with a smile. Hinata's face was expressionless, but her mind was anything but. Was Asuma concerned about her? He's also taken a shine to Naruto-kun. Is it true he assigned Naruto-kun to train you? Hinata inquired, slightly intrigued. Yes, Naruto-kun is bound to us, Hanabi began. What? Hinata exclaimed, looking at her. Asuma made him your servant, her rage at her father rising. No, Hanabi exclaimed, surprised. He offered himself as a kind of reparation for losing you. Hinata shook her head slowly, turning away. The fool, she murmured quietly. What are you planning to do now, Nai-san? Hanabi inquired. Hinata gave her a look. I'm going to kill a traitor, she said coldly, before changing her expression to a more neutral one. And kill Naruto-kun, she added. What? Hanabi exclaimed, stunned. Hinata rose from her bed and bent to retrieve her straw hat. But, Hanabi began, is in more danger than he realizes, Hinata interjected. Better I end his life than leave him for what Akatsuki has planned for him. Why do they want him? Hanabi wondered, still unable to believe what she had heard her sister say. Was the boy she grew close to in just 2 years a target for a terrorist group of missing men? I can't tell you ... but I can tell you've grown quite close to him since I left, Hinata said to her sister. You can't kill him, pleaded Hanabi. Why? Hinata inquired, her tone oddly curious. Because you love him, exclaimed Hanabi. Hinata did nothing but stare at her, move closer, and place the hat on the bed's edge. I know ... all the more reason for me to go ahead with it, she said as she drew her into another comforting embrace. Goodbye Hanabi Nai-san. We will most likely never meet again after this, Hinata began. I know you will become an excellent leader of the Hyuga clan, and make our entire family proud, kissing her softly on the cheek and forehead before placing her right hand palm on her head with her thumb on her kissed forehead. Your abilities will return when you awaken again, which will be in 4 days, Hinata said quietly. Nai-san don't, Hanabi exclaimed before Hinata used a painless jutsu to put her to sleep. She sighed as she looked at her sleeping sister. She carefully and gently carried her back to her room and placed her under the covers of her bed. Someone will find her, become concerned about her inability to wake up, and summon hospital medic nins. They'll have no idea she was there. She returned one last glance to her sleeping younger sister before turning and closing the door behind her, ignoring the strange stinging sensation in her eyes. But let's get back to business. The traitor is first. Sakura sneezed again and wiped her nose calmly. Perfect time to catch a cold, she thought bitterly as she continued her hospital rotation. She had been sneezing all day and was concerned that she would infect the other patients. Tsunade noticed this and approached her. Sakura, hi Hokage-sama, she said respectfully, looking at her mentor. You should know better than anyone how easily disease spreads and how dangerous it can be, Tsunade said as she folded her arms. Hello, but I'm fine really, Sakura said, holding her clipboard closer to indicate he wanted to return to work. I'm not buying it. You're taking the rest of the day off. No excuses, Tsunade grumbled. But, Sakura started. No excuses, Tsunade stated emphatically. Fine, I'll go get some rest, but I'd like to return tomorrow, Sakura insisted. If you're well, I expect nothing less, Tsunade said, removing her clipboard and proceeding to her first patient. Damn cold. She decided to get something to eat as she walked out of the hospital, having only a ration bar to sustain her due to the long hospital hours. She should eat ramen or something. Ramen if the jerk wasn't there. Sakura was so deep in thought that she didn't notice the team in front of her and accidentally ran into one of its members. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed as she bounced off a Chunin jacket. "Oh, don't worry Sakura-san, I'm fine." The enthusiasm immediately pointed to only one Chunin on Konoha, the zealous zealot of hard work, Rock Lee. His companions behind him are showing signs of displeasure with their friend's demeanor. "Lee, all she did was walk into you, nothing to make such a big deal about," exclaimed Team Guy's lone female member. 1010, reputably Konoha's weapons specialist, was carrying a large scroll on her back and dressed in simple yet elegant clothing of her family. Sakura enjoyed speaking with her because she was one of Konoha's few powerful kunoichi. The other member of Team Guy let out an amused humph. The Konoha Jounin's prodigy was dressed in long formal white robes. His eyes were his most distinguishing feature, identifying him as a Hyuga. He wore no visible weapons or pouches, but she knew, like many others, he was among the most dangerous Jounin in Konoha. Hyuga Neji, the calculating and silent. The Hyuga had his sleeves rolled up as a sign of immense wisdom, which Sakura guessed was not far off the mark given his intelligence. "So, Sakura-san, what brings you here?" Lee asked politely, his crush being both sweet and annoying at times. "I'm going to get some ramen. Would you like to join me, Neji-san and Tenten-san?" Sakura asked. "Yash, of course we will," Lee exclaimed, pumping his arms in the air and looking expectantly at his teammate. "I have to pass. I have a painful amount of things to sharpen," 1010 apologized, scratching her head. Lee turned to face his nemesis. Neji sighed as he looked at each of the three shinobi. "All right, I have nothing better to do. I will join you," Neji said, knowing that being trapped between two females and his friend meant he had little choice but to move with the other two. When Sakura arrived at the ramen shop, she let out a happy small chuckle at the absence of its usual patron. She didn't have Lee's enthusiasm or stamina to deal with him right now, so she went inside to order with the others. Where would a traitor seek refuge? As she walked through the busy Konoha streets, she pondered. She decided it would be best if she didn't use her bloodline. Any amount of chakra would be picked up and make her a visible threat to the shinobi, exacerbated by the defense protocols and seals dotted around the village. She approached the ramen stand where she had eaten numerous times as a child, and if she remembered correctly, Naruto had invited her to join him. She wasn't sure if she had any ramen or if she had passed out on the spot. Was I really that easy to fall unconscious? She wondered, shaking her head slightly. She was perplexed. She became aware of it after taking a few more steps. The traitor was so close that she became fully aware of their current location. She tried, but ultimately failed, to control her bloodlust and anger. It was felt by all three. The interruption caused all three to pause in their meal and conversation. The intent to kill was so large and dark that those who couldn't sense chakra didn't feel it. However, the old man and her daughter appeared to be unconcerned about the three shinobi interrupting their conversation. Neji, who was filling in as a journalist, used a small hand sign. To those who were not well trained, he appeared to lift a finger almost involuntarily. As Neji activated his Byakugan, it meant hold your ground, wait for further orders to high-ranking shinobi. He searched for the source with his vision spread over 500 yards in a circle. He found it, or rather didn't find it, after only 15 seconds of searching. It was by far the strangest sight he had ever witnessed in his time as a shinobi. It was a sliver of nothing. It was like looking into a black hole, with no color or shape. It was a space and time in that location that had simply vanished, absorbing all of the colors from the objects around it. However, the intent made it relatively easy to notice to his eyes. Someone just lost his cover, he reasoned. It was moving, slowly at first, then quickly, covering nearly 250 meters before he gave the signal to move. The elderly man noticed the unexpected vacant seats in front of him, with money neatly deposited on the counter. "Ninjas today." He laughed, slowly shaking his head. Neji followed the enemy as fast as he could, his teammate guiding him with his eyes. Though not nearly as intelligent as Shikamaru, Neji was still among the brightest in strategic movement and planning, summarizing a number of conclusions. The foe is undoubtedly an expert of stealth and tracking, able to locate enemies from afar, and swiftly relocated with a pre-planned escape route, Neji said calmly as they leapt from building to building at breakneck speed, Lee and Sakura following his every word. But save the worst for last, and, to add to that, I have no idea what they look like. After all, Lee and Sakura shared a puzzled expression. What could possibly hide from the Hyuga's vision? He noticed something and raised his right hand in a stop sign, saying, "Our foe has stopped moving. Prepare yourself." before leaping through the final set of foliage. They landed in a grassy clearing, and the surrounding trees and stream indicated that they had arrived at a ninja training ground. Ground 7, if he remembered correctly. His Byakugan immediately noticed the lack of space despite being only 10 meters away, and he promptly decided to deactivate his bloodline in order to see with his own eyes. Standing in front of him was a 15-year-old girl with black hair, and dressed casually in a black shirt with blue trousers and a Konoha Chunin jacket. Her back turned to them as she began moving to the stream in front of her. Halt! She turned her head slightly to acknowledge their presence. The three moved closer while maintaining a reasonable distance, each in their proper taijutsu stance. Identify yourself. You wear a jinjutsu to hide your image, Neji thought to himself. The girl simply returned to the stream and reached down to the water, slowly bringing it to her mouth. She turned, and strange static filled the air as she reached the top of her head and began speaking. This is unimportant to you, Neji Nyai-san. The static came to a halt, revealing a relatively thin and feminine black and red cloak, a fingerless tightly gloved hand lowering a straw hat that they tossed aside. Lee and Sakura both exclaimed. Neji's posture sagged slightly. Hinata-san. Lee and Sakura exclaimed in unison. Hinata-sama, Neji said inaudibly before returning to his stance, his training and talent for observation returning. An Akatsuki cloak declared her a foe, but she remained motionless and taking no immediate action. What are you doing here? Neji asked calmly, deferring other, less important questions until later. A jounin to the end, very observant of you Neji Nyai-san, Hinata said evenly, almost absently playing with the tightness of the metal plates covering her wrists and forearms before putting her arms down at her side. If you must know, she said patiently, putting her hand down, and looking through the group at its pink-haired member, the intense bloodlust returning. I'm here to kill Sakura, she stated calmly. Sakura exclaimed, and Lee turned to face his potential girlfriend. Neji appeared unmoved. For what purpose? Why would you commit such an act? Neji inquired again, his stance firm, but he activated his bloodline. Hinata looked at him with piercing calm, and he saw nothing in return. Nothing to indicate current strength or potential weakness. He saw no emotion, and even the intense intent to kill she displayed vanished entirely. It appears that Sakura-san keeps you on a short leash, Nai-san, Hinata said, her eyes narrowing slightly. Or perhaps Naruto lied to protect the truth. I assume he said he was to blame for my disappearance. Hinata inquired, her tone implying something more. Neji considered this, thinking that something was clearly wrong with this. His eyes continued to look at Hinata, but his perception was directed to Sakura. Naruto had been lying, he was certain of it. The day he returned with Sakura in tow, blood staining their clothes, it was claimed that Hinata had been lost, and Naruto was to blame. Some of her blood was also on him amidst the various stab and cut wounds. The mission, it was labeled. No real information was relayed to the 10 remaining shinobi as Naruto described what had apparently happened. It wasn't just Naruto ... It is never just Naruto. He himself knew he would go through armies, S-ranked shinobi, death, and hell itself to save all close to him. Neji had also been saved on occasion due to Naruto's reckless companionship. So this incident of leaving Hinata behind for the sake of the mission was absurd in its tale as its execution. Never leave a shinobi behind was always Naruto's style, and I never believed their story, Neji said emphatically. Lee and Sakura looking at him in disbelief. Hinata's eyes widened slightly before returning to the same unfeeling expression. I don't hate you, Nai-san, but you should know what I'm about to do now, Hinata said, staring at Sakura like a prey animal. And you know exactly what I'm going to do. I hope you don't mind, Neji said, crouching slightly and spreading his arms in preparation. You have my word on it. It is your duty, Hinata said, returning her full attention to Neji. Bykugan. Hinata and Neji yelled at the same time, their bloodlines activating simultaneously, and leapt at each other. An observer would struggle to see what was going on, but would simply claim that they were fighting. But that was simple-minded ignorance to a Hyuga. They fought as they had been trained since birth, one by a self-taught genius and the other by a psychopath-trained hard worker. Blows were exchanged faster than the eye could follow, and it appeared as if a miniature cyclone had formed on the grounds, with constant sounds of flesh hitting flesh as each blocked the other. The ground itself shook at the vibrations caused by their battle, as the two Hyuga fought with an insane amount of agility and skill, only capable by their bloodline, heritage, and their own personal traits. Sakura watched in awe, unable to comprehend what was going on in their duel arena, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Why did Hinata hate her? Why did she hate her so much that she wanted her dead? Last she remembered, they were close friends, they went on the mission together, she was tragically lost. And Sakura mourned for her when she was declared missing. Naruto blamed himself for it, yet she was still unaccounted for. Lee couldn't see it for what it was, but as a student of the combat expert Madogai, he was trained to fight at similar speeds. It was beautiful, he thought, such symmetry, gentle yet ferocious, deadly yet elegant. Such combat could so rarely be witnessed, and refused to be distracted by anything. His eternal rival, the Hyuga prodigy, and the eldest daughter of the main branch family, raging ... it looked more like. Suddenly, Neji shot back and leapt into the sky, Hinata following with her eyes on the ground. Neji drew his arms and palms together in a manner that reminded her of her sister's, but she was not foolish enough to believe it would be the same and deemed it to be potentially 10 times more effective. "Huashohake," yelled Neji, releasing the energy. Her cousin did not disappoint her. The air beam was nearly 100 times the size of her sister's, and at the speed it traveled, avoiding it would be difficult, if not impossible. May as well stop it, she thought quickly, pulling her hands slightly apart. Neji witnessed his cousin doing something contrary to Hyuga teachings. She moved her hands in an intricate manner without her feet leaving the ground, but she could see strange seals forming in the air above her due to his bloodline. As the blast reached her, the ground around her was instantly compressed by a few feet, leaving what appeared to be a small island for her to stand on. The blast seemed to splash onto a transparent semi-sphere which surrounded and protected her, leaving her untouched by his attack. He returned to his stance after landing, wondering what else she had developed during her long absence. It was his turn to not be let down. Hinata formed an X with her forearms and her fingertips began to glow blue light slowly. Chakra Neji noted himself preparing for the unknown. Hinata spread her arms and bowed slightly forward as thousands of thin blue filaments emerged from her fingers and flew at breakneck speeds towards him. "Chakra strings," Neji exclaimed, leaping back further to avoid being swarmed. The first strings to reach him were cut instantly, but as more and more arrived, it became more difficult, constantly on the move. He cut any that were even close to reaching him, but they soon began to come from all directions, and he didn't have the speed to deal with them all. He went on the defensive, releasing some of his chakra and starting to rotate in unnatural gyrations. "Chitin," he yelled, the ultimate defense allowing him to cut all the strings around him. He knew he couldn't hang on indefinitely, so he was relieved when they began to slow and shrink in size, Hinata retracting them within her fingers. When Neji saw Sakura reach for a kunai, she knew she was going to attack. "Do not intervene, you are not involved," he yelled, preventing his teammate from doing anything stupid, leaving Sakura and Lee surprised. Looking back at Hinata, she seemed completely at ease, but he wasn't as quiet. Looking at the chakra paths on his hands, he saw to his horror that they had been cut into in places. It seemed that he couldn't stop them without being harmed himself. A chakra stings attack that can slice through a ninja's chakra system. She must have gone through a lot to achieve that, he lamented. Hinata was in the Jukin stance, choosing to respect him, but as far as he could tell, her chakra system was unaffected by his attacks. He suddenly saw her spring at him with difficult-to-follow speed and began to attack. This was far more difficult than any previous fight. His Jukin training and Byakugan's insight pushed to their absolute limits, as he only just managed to stop the blows from reaching him and causing damage. Even if she didn't show it, she was enjoying it. For her part, Neji was proving to be the greatest opponent she had had to date, much better than Deidara and most of the Akatsuki she found. She disliked having to fight another person she had familial bonds with, but it seemed she had no choice. However, for all his skill, he was still not better than Itachi. He was in a whole league of his own. She let a few chakra stings loose from her fingers after a few blows, which Neji saw too late as it effectively sliced through his left hand. Trying to pull back but keep up the pace, knowing his hand was now useless, he increased the effort of his right, before a feint from her found another string cutting his remaining hand, before she mercifully allowed him to pull back. His hands were shaking, and staring at them made him feel sick, making his stomach lurch slightly. According to his eyes, his chakra had stopped flowing to his hands, giving them the same appearance he had seen on corpses. He had never seen or felt anything like this before, and it was 1,000 times worse than simple Jukin. He was terrified because he was up against a foe he couldn't beat and now had no way to beat at all. Looking away from his cousin, he couldn't help but wonder. "How?" he inquired, his voice trembling. "I returned from hell, Nysan, and I was given a small reward for my troubles. I also know the weaknesses of the Hyuga clan," she said, narrowing her eyes and raising her right hand. I know the weaknesses of the Hyuga clan, she said, opening her hand and sending the strings. Neji began leaping again. All of his defenses and ability to attack were disabled. He knew the fight was over. Unaware of its existence, one solitary string encircled Neji and struck at the blind spot in Neji's vision and passed horizontally. Neji landed and somehow managed to stay on his feet. His head span, his vision stopped, and his stomach lurched again. Neji had just enough time before the unavoidable happened to think one last time. "Oh, Kami," he said, dropping to his knees. As he retched onto the ground before him, he tasted the unfortunately familiar bitter taste. "Neji-kun," Lee yelled, worriedly looking at his rival and teammate, never having seen him brought to his knees, let alone throw up. He and Sakura were about to intervene when they heard his voice. "Don't intervene," Neji yelled, his throat burning, his voice shaky, preventing them from doing anything rash while he was still active. He gargled and spat, hoping to rid his mouth of the loathsome taste. Reaching for a water bottle he kept within his robes, he noticed a shadow looming over him and looked up, one eye closed and one squinted, as Hinata placed her thumb on his face and palm on his head. She knew it would hurt him if she did it on his forehead, so she put her thumb between his eyes and looked at him directly. "This brings our total to even, Neji-ni-san," she said quietly, using the jutsu to catch him as he fell unconscious to the ground. "Neji-kun," Lee yelled as he ran for his fallen friend. Lee inspected his comrade, Hinata, moving back slightly. "He sleeps, Lee-kun, he is unharmed," Hinata said calmly, causing Lee to relax slightly before lifting his friends in his arms and quickly depositing them next to Sakura, before turning back to and walking away from Hinata. "Hinata-san," Lee said formally, "Neji-kun is indeed unharmed, as you say, but I cannot allow you to hurt the woman I care about," he said firmly. Her head shook. "If only you knew, Lee-kun, how she treats injured comrades. But I can't blame you. Your trust in people makes you who you are, and I respect that, even if I find it slightly naive," Hinata said calmly. Lee came to a reasonable conclusion after recalling the Neji fight. "Hinata-san, you are very formidable, so if I may, I would like to fight you equally," he said, reaching for his leg warmers and pulling out his weighted bandoliers. "Very well," Hinata said, knowing his ability had tenfold increased. The ground shook violently as they impacted against the ground and formed deep craters, throwing them aside. Lee took a stance, his right hand flat on the ground, the other behind his back. "May we, Hinata-san?" Lee said before walking away. Her eyes zipped to her left as she appeared to be only just able to see him. Ducking, she only just managed to miss his fist, before rising and stepping left to evade a kick. Leaping back, her eyes just able to keep up with him as he rained blow after blow down upon her, her juken evading each but finding that his intense speed was truly an issue. "Konoha Senpu," Lee yelled, using his impressive spin kick to not give her a chance to strategize. Unfortunately, she was waiting for this. Lee turning, unknowingly wrapping the string he can't see around him, and charging. Hinata bringing her fingers of her left hand together, slicing the string through his knees. His legs suddenly lifeless, he fell hard, looking at his legs. He attempted to stand, but failed, noticing his legs shaking, as Neji had done during his battle. "Hinata-san, you have developed an excellent ability," he said nobly, as a warrior would, "but I cannot allow myself to be beaten. I must protect my Nindo," he said quietly. The ground started to tremble slightly. From his vantage point, air began to rise rapidly. He opened an inner gate, she thought, her string disintegrating completely as the severed chakra pathways seemed to repair themselves. It appears that just one will not stop him, she reflected. The earth began to shake violently. As his head rose slightly, she noticed he didn't just open one gate. According to her observations, he opened 5 of them. His skin turned red, chakra leaked from him. His pupils vanished, leaving only plain white eyes, and his usual bowl-cut hairstyle was forced upwards by the energy he focused on. He blinked out of existence, leaving a large cracked and broken fissure in the ground beneath where he was standing. He had her, he slugged her, right in the stomach, expelling the air from her lungs, pulling his left arm to uppercut her in the jaw. It connected, sending her flying into the air before leaping after her. 20 feet above the ground, he grabbed her by the back of her robe and threw her down into the ground before using his titanic chakra to propel himself downwards. She landed hard, smashing into the floor below. Kicking herself up, she saw him fall towards her to deliver the coup de grace, Urarange, Konoha's most powerful taijutsu move outside the Hyuga clan. Not yet, she reasoned. She began a complex hand-seal combination as he descended. Only a few meters away, he drew his arm back and punched. but he caught his wrist with her left hand with unnatural speed, evading her forward momentum. She jabbed her right fore and middle finger into his stomach, his chakra core, watching as the chakra system shut off and he reverted back to normal before catching him with her palm and throwing him to the side. Lifting her thumb to whip the blood trickling down her chin, she watched as he struggled to get off his back from the ground, but realized he didn't have any strength left, and he bore a tired, confused look at her. "Thank you, Hinata-san, for an excellent fight. You are the first person in over 2 years to make me bleed, Lee-san. Thank you for the pain, it was most refreshing," she said, kneeling by his side, her hand on her body to heal her broken ribs, bruised stomach, and torn chin. His expression changed to one of desperation. "Please don't kill her Lee said before collapsing. "I don't have that choice anymore, Lee-san. Sakura made the decision for herself," she said, rising. Her injuries healed completely. Her stamina slightly diminished, but more than enough to deal with what was to come. Finally, she thought as she looked at the group's final member. As Sakura approached Hinata, her aura of palpable bloodshed increased tenfold as she walked slowly towards her. She then heard Hinata speak in a maniacal sing-song voice. Ku raw. He did not awaken. It had been more than 2 days and he hadn't moved an inch. He still resembled a corpse. Temari decided to return the next day with a basket of homemade food, reasoning that the hospital food wasn't helping him and that he hadn't eaten anything since he got the damn thing in the first place. Sadly, she thought, the dinner at Nara's could have gone a lot better. She was there with his parents, and she couldn't help but notice his mother's gaze shifting to the empty seat where Shikamaru usually sat at the table. Yoshino burst into tears and left the room, followed by her husband, leaving Temari alone. She didn't have much appetite after that and decided to help clear the table before retiring quietly. Shikamaru still had some of the sand and seals on him, most notably a smear of her own blood on his forehead. She sat on a nearby vacant chair and stared at him as she placed the basket beside his bed. She moved her right hand onto her face, unsure whether it was voluntary or not. She followed his bored but sharp eyes, his thin nose, and his flat lips. Retracting her hand, she removed his hairband, allowing his hair to fall onto his pillow. He let out a small chuckle. He really did look sexy like that. Better not let Ino see, she'd be all over him. Her happy grin had turned into a sad frown. What could have caused this? He was supposed to come up short against her. Shikamaru should have lost to Sabaku no Temari, not some 2-bit Akatsuki bastard who was probably protecting his friends. Her eyes stinging for a reason she was all too familiar with. She missed him. She missed him a lot, and she despised it. Her pride was irritated that he made her feel so weak and useless, and as a kunoichi of the sand, it was excruciatingly painful. The eldest daughter of a previous Keisuke, the scion of House Sabaku, the greatest and by far the oldest of Sunagakure's noble families. Royalty, like the strength of the winds, ran through her veins. She was trained, sharpened, and bred to be a weapon of war from the time she could walk. She was taught to be emotionless when fighting her enemies, merciless in defeat, and to scatter their shinobi into the dust. Fight to the end. No defeat was a popular expression among Suna shinobi. Mourning a lost shinobi was pointless to them because a kunai or shuriken is not recollected after it is thrown and used, she was taught. Her bastard father, if she could call him that, took such doctrine to its logical conclusion. She remembered beating teenagers into bloody messes with her bare hands from the age of 7 and up, and any accidents were a necessary part of survival. She even remembered being almost ravaged by a group of 4 Chunin-level boys who grinned at her as if she were a piece of meat to be tasted. That is, if she hadn't introduced their areas to the kunai sets she hid in various parts of her clothing. They had no chance of ever having children, or even living. Walking away from that massacre of blood-stained walls and severed body parts, thankfully still a virgin, messy yet pleased, carrying kunai dripping crimson in each hand. Her satisfaction ending as she remembered her father nodding in appreciation for her work, she knowing it was he who gave the order in the first place. She remembered similar training exercises, such as 30-mile runs through scorching deserts with limited food, water, and supplies. All of this came in the form of a single slice of watermelon. She chuckled. In the eyes of a Suna nin, it was conservation, and they were only given a rough straw sheet to sleep on. They were to keep moving until the sun set and then rise before it rose. Only 7 of the 20 rookies sent into the desert survived, including herself. The weak perish, only the strong survive, she remembered another popular saying. But the Konoha Chunin exam 4 years before had changed everything. When she arrived, she admitted to the Chunin at the gate that she wasn't particularly impressed. Wow. Trees. Amazing. Big mountain with carved faces ... Even more amazing ... As if Suna didn't have thousands of pretty sculptures. She sneered at such outward displays of liberty and grandeur. To the Suna shinobi, it all translated as weakness. She wished she could have participated in the infamous Bloody Mist trials in the Misty Village. Suna trials had students killing each other for status ... or sport. Then came the preliminary exam of Konoha, where she met him, Shikamaru Nara. She'd met her fair share of nutcases, psychopaths, monsters, demons, and famous shinobi during her time as a kunoichi. But he was by far the strangest and most mysterious shinobi she'd ever seen. He was so very lazy. A shinobi who couldn't care less about training, titles, enemies, or anything else that required him to raise his hand. It was as if someone had gotten a drop of her blood and created the polar opposite of her. At first glance, she saw someone who would die at the first sign of danger or flee like a coward with his tail between his legs. But then she saw him defeat a sound nin as if everything had been done for him. At the sight of it, she mentally claimed it was a fluke. Then it appeared that fate was having an odd game with her. She was forced to compete against him in the finals. Him, a guy who yawned and grumbled at the mention of work. It was nearly an insult. Him, when she saw the roster, she had a thought. Fine, just kill him and move on to the better shinobi, she sighed. Her father appeared to have arranged another little training exercise, similar to the 4 Chunin incident, a few days before the match. She chuckled, because when Suna Chunin died, they screamed like little children. She told Baki she was bored and wanted to do some espionage after taking only 10 seconds to dispatch them even without her fan. He agreed as long as their true mission, to destroy Konoha, was not jeopardized. She didn't like the idea of destroying a country that was first and foremost an ally, and secondly, why destroy when the strategic benefit was minimal, if not non-existent? All those lives wasted simply to expand the sand and sound nations and share the spoils. It made her sick at how pitiful it sounded. She discovered his location after a little searching and overhearing a few conversations from his teammates. After all, if he had a minor accident, she didn't have to fight him, so it seemed like a reasonable idea to her. She found him walking to an unknown location after some traveling, and without drawing the attention of any of the ANBU or Konoha shinobi. He led her to a grassy plain with a few hills and thick trees nearby, keeping a safe distance to avoid detection. He was training, and she was finally able to see what he was capable of. What she got was not what she had hoped for. He lay down on the grass, put his arms behind his head, and promptly fell asleep. Her jaw dropped. He was sleeping in the middle of the day just a few days before their game. Sleeping? Are you kidding me? She mentally yelled. After a few minutes of staring at his unconscious ass, she tensed at a sudden movement, only to be disappointed when he reached up to scratch his stomach. Do anything. Anything. She mentally roared as she stared at him. She was disgusted by him after 40 minutes of watching him sleep and occasionally scratch himself. Suna, relaxing was only used to nurse injuries received from training, so you could then return to it after you had recovered ... So this ... She felt her anger give her a slight headache. He spread his fingers and raised his arm to the sky once more. Now he's flexing his fingers. Great, Temari thought, bored out of her skull in a way she didn't believe was possible. Looking closer, he appeared to be awake, staring through the spaces between his fingers before repositioning his hand behind his head. If you wanted to ask me something, Kunoichi of the Sands, you should just come out and ask, instead of watching me for almost an hour, he said loudly, but in a sleepy tone. She went completely still. He was aware she was present. All this time. Was she really that easy to detect ... Of course not. Who is this person? She leapt from her branch, landing only a few feet away from where he lay and spearing the edge of her fan into the ground, staring down in obvious rage. He smiled as he looked up at her. Hello, he smiled politely. She didn't do anything but stare. Well, I'm sorry if I didn't entertain or enlighten you. I am a very boring person ... or so I've been told, he said, raising his hand to cover his yawn. Explain yourself, Temari spat, attempting to break him out of the mask he was clearly putting on for her. He scratched his brow and looked at her before taking a deep breath. My name is Shikamaru, and I'm 12 years old. I enjoy watching clouds and taking long naps. He began. Cut the crap, she yelled. What? He asked, calmly perplexed by her sudden outburst. How did you know where I was and that I had been following you for an hour? She inquired. 52 minutes and 25 seconds and counting. He yawned again, his hand covering his mouth. She froze once more before exclaiming, Shut up. Okay. he said, clearly bored, unfazed by her rage. She clung to the edge of her fan, wondering why she hadn't struck him down with it yet. But she was still a little curious. By the way, he said with an ominous tone, looking at her with fully open and piercing eyes, don't ever trail after my friends like their prey again. She clutched her fan even more tightly, turning her knuckles white. Is that a threat? She asked quietly, her eyes narrowing into slits. Nope, just a heads up, Shikamaru said with an unnerving ease. A heads up for what exactly? She asked, her grin so sharp and menacing it could cut glass. If you hurt them, he said, opening his eyes and staring at her with piercing eyes once more. I will kill you, he said calmly and confidently. Growing up, she received her fair share of death threats. Because the majority of these were from her own brother Gaara, she didn't act on them out of fear of an unavoidable and painful death. But then there were those by other shinobi on which she undoubtedly acted. This was yet another of those beautiful moments. Pulling her fan from the ground, she quickly brought it over her head before slamming it two-handed down on his chest and head. The impact shook the ground she was standing on, and as the smoke cleared, she smiled cruelly at the obvious mess that his skull had become. But she appears to have missed. Looking up, she noticed him with one foot on the fan and the other on the ground, making the sharp sound of a kunai withdrawn against her throat. She looked at him with surprise and a sense of the unknown. Fear. His cold expression was more than enough to convince her of his strength. But then he gave her a pleasant, cheerful grin and motioned her to look at his weapon. Looking down, she saw that his hand was empty but that he had formed a fist at her throat, similar to the blonde brat she had seen earlier against the Hyuga, with the kunai held at his side in his left hand. In Konoha, we watch out for our own, we protect them, and the bonds we form are what make us strong, he said calmly. I have not killed, and I don't fight women. Not it's my thing. He shrugged, but looked at her again. Hurt any one of my friends, and I go against both of those policies, Shikamaru promised calmly. Friends? She spit, mockingly chuckling, not wanting to show fear despite her current state. Troublesome. Do you even know what that word means? He asked, slightly doubting her sanity. Friends are nothing more than distractions, mere bait to be used and expended to accomplish the mission, she said harshly, pulling her fan from the ground and placing it under her arm. He raised his brow and looked at her with a bored expression. Wow, so I guess it runs in the family then, Shikamaru said almost to himself, staring at his hand, idly spinning the kunai on his left middle finger. What do you mean by that? She scoffed. I didn't know Suna would stoop to such levels of attacking an unarmed injured person. He explained calmly. Quiet, only he's like that, she exclaimed. Only him. Really? His disbelief was like nails on a chalkboard to her, approaching him so that they were face to face. You are going to die, Nara Shikamaru. That much I can promise, she said quietly, her eyes narrowing. We all will one day, he said, walking around her, not really paying attention to what she said, and heading back down the hill. I got some friends to meet for lunch, so I guess I'll see you during the finals. By the way. He stopped, looking over his shoulder to her. We have a saying or a general rule here in Konoha. It's called the will of fire. Trust me, we leaves don't fall so easily. Pardon the pun. Or had no will. Friends were nothing more than a distraction. She wasn't sure she believed that anymore. The next time they saw each other was on the arena floor. She had agreed to fight for two reasons. First, to protect the mission. And second, to face a foe who could easily be better than her. She wasn't mistaken. The match was a jumble of failed ideas and ineffective attacks from her. Keeping the enemy at long range was no longer an option. His accursed shadow trailing her throughout the battle. His thought-processing abilities were unnatural, faster than anyone she had ever met, and more intelligent than the majority of Suna's senior population, shinobi or not. He ran circles around her, catching her off guard and throwing her off balance several times before finally catching her. What's the worst part? It was a plan. A long, meticulously choreographed plan that he had orchestrated from the start of the match to her eventual capture. Walking up to each other, he came close and stared at her, and she stared back, wondering if she would see the light of day or return home again. As she felt her neck being pushed uncomfortably upwards by a hand made of his shadows. His surrender was the final mark. He gave up. He gave up. That was a completely bizarre thought. Her pride was shattered by her first defeat, and he simply gave up. He shrugged, saying he was out of chakra and had planned 200 moves ahead of time. But he didn't gloat, sneer, scatter her name to the winds, or destroy her. He let her go. After the battle for Konoha, she wondered if she could ever beat him, thinking something along the lines of no. It seemed she didn't care. She considered losing to be one of the best experiences she could have had, as it taught her that she was not invincible and that there was one opponent she could fight evenly and lose to. He was wondering when he'd see the lazy pineapple-headed ninja again. When they returned home, they were met with shock and confusion. The Kazekage had been assassinated. Her scum-encrusted, murderous, rape-seeking father, who forced her to undergo harrowing forms of training and lifestyle, which she miraculously survived, alive and unharmed, was finally gone. She smiled, a large happy smile she hadn't seen before, so wide it hurt her face slightly. Her life was going to get better, she was certain of it. Other things had changed as well. Gaara was different, nicer. He, too, had been defeated by Uzumaki Naruto, the loud blonde shinobi who had defeated the Hyuga genius in the finals. She shook her head, having grossly underestimated Konoha's strength. Even after going through all of his forms as Shukaku, Gaara, the most powerful shinobi Suna had ever produced, had been defeated. She remembered seeing the Uzumaki as she approached Gaara. She watched in awe as the Uchiha kneeled beside him, the blonde shinobi willing himself forward with barely any mobility left. His eyes filled with a fierce determination that scared her slightly. Kankuro was no better off. His cockiness was destroyed after his chakra was apparently eaten by the insects of the Aburame bug user, wearing a frown he had seen countless times. KMI. He was such a sore loser. Shortly after, Konoha representatives arrived to rearrange the peace. For some reason, she hoped he'd be there, unable to recognize the feelings she felt when he wasn't. But she was taken aback by what happened only a few weeks later. A mission. To Konoha. A rescue mission of all things, with him as the leader of the group in need. For some reason, she was eager to see him and hastened to prepare to save his slacker ass. The Sound Nin who kidnapped Uchiha Sasuke were numerous and powerful, nearly taking the lives of the Konoha shinobi who fought with all their might. The Sound Nin having surrendered themselves completely for power, each possessing demonic and forbidden seals that gave them power. The Konoha shinobi fought with their souls, but it appears that wasn't enough. She remembered his face when she blew the sound bitch off him. He had some of his hair falling across his cheeks. And after making a joke about being weak, Temari had to quickly look away, preventing him from seeing the unannounced blush on her face. After defeating the Sound Nin, she informed him that they had found his overweight friend in the forest. She overlooked his condition as simply being alive. But the Nara approached her, grabbed her shoulders, and demanded that she tell him his condition. The look in his eyes threw her off balance, so much concern for another person. When she paused to respond, he shook her violently before yelling at the top of his lungs to spit, his eyes incensed and teeth bared. The look of horror on his face perplexed her to no end, before she watched him leap full speed back to Konoha, with her barely keeping up. When she returned to Konoha, she learned that his teammates, all of whom were close friends, had been injured, 2 of whom were in critical condition, including his closet one, the overweight one named Akamichi Choji. His anguish and worry bored her slightly, and she lectured him on necessary losses, now regretting that she had said such a thing to a Konoha shinobi, realizing that their bonds to each other were worth dying for, as she had heard Uzumaki Naruto had nearly done to bring back the Uchiha. Watching the lazy ninja cry ... felt like needles in her heart ... His father scolded him for being a coward ... She respected him far more than her own father ... But the accusation of cowardice was a little difficult to stomach. A few months later, she returned to Konoha as the Suna ambassador and representative, bolstering the 2 countries' severely weakened alliance. And, surprise, Shikamaru was her political escort. She quickly grew fond of the lazy Chunin, a great match with her demanding and pushy attitude and him's severe laziness and stereotypical views on men and women. But, despite the jokes, insults, and occasional arguments, he always returns, and she soon developed a sick feeling inside of her. She felt sick every time she saw him, but she knew it wasn't because she hated, despised, or was angry with him. It was something he did for her ... The way he acted. His behavior, and the fact that he was the first person to demonstrate to her that kindness was not a weakness. He made her kinder to her brothers and other shinobi. She discovered ... But her newfound compassion and sentimentality came back to bite her. But she remembered the true nail in the coffin. As she began her duties as ambassador, she was forced to travel back and forth between Suna and Konoha, which was exhausting because each time she had to arrange some form of accommodation, which is when Shikamaru had the brilliant idea of living with his family whenever she visited, giving her a very spacious room, a private bathroom with a shower, and no need to pay rent for anything. She found such freedom unsettling, as did his parents' kindness. They welcomed her with open arms, smiled sweetly at her, and treated her as a member of the family. His father was an elite jounin of Konoha, and after hearing some stories about him and reading on some of his background, she grew a sense of fear at this adult variation of Shikamaru. Boy, was she wrong. He was witty, had a great sense of humor, and acted like well. The father she always wanted. Temari, who had grown up with strict rules and an unfeeling parent who treated her like filth, appreciated this greatly and almost called her mom on some occasions. Not that she minded that one time when it was just the two of them in the room. She simply smiled sweetly and walked away. But then she had to go and complicate everything. She discovered the sluggish leaf on the same hill where they first met. He raised his head from the ground and smiled, which made her stomach churn. "Hey," he said courteously. "Hello," she said, sitting beside him and looking up to see what he saw. "What exactly is so interesting about them?" she asked, motioning to the clouds above. "They have such freedom, are allowed to live in peace. They float above us without any concern, attachment, or worry of any kind," Temari said almost dreamily, not sure if he was fully conscious. I never thought of it that way. I just saw them as things that provided rain and shaded the sun to allow for better concealment." She reflected on her training and the valuable commodity it provided her people. He looked at her and nodded before returning his gaze. "Do you have a dream?" Temari asked, half randomly, half to see if Konoha was as free-spirited as she imagined. "My dream is to marry a woman who is neither beautiful nor ugly, to have 2 children, the first a girl, and the second a boy, to retire when my daughter marries and my son becomes a genin, to spend the rest of my life playing shogi or go without a care in the world, and to die before my wife," he said calmly, gazing at the sky in an almost dreamlike state. "Wow. You really are lazy," she chuckled, Shikamaru smiling back. "What about you?" he asked politely. Temari's smile faded as she turned her gaze away from the sky. "Relax, I removed it, I need a new one," she said quietly, looking up at the clouds. But it was to die in a battle worthy of my ancestors. I was fairly short-sighted at the time." She chuckled, looking down at the grass again, remembering the tough-as-nails little girl she used to be. "So you really want a wife who is not beautiful?" Temari asked Shikamaru, wondering about herself for some reason. Shikamaru remained silent and gazed upwards. "Who knows? Fate has a strange sense of irony about those types of things." He sighed quietly. She then remembered him doing something in the arena at the end of their match, as well as saying something to her during their first meeting. "I'm curious about something," she started. Shikamaru turns her head to face her. "Would you have killed me in the arena, during our match, if you knew what we were going to do?" Temari asked, recalling her neck being pushed painfully. Shikamaru discovered she had asked with a surprisingly straight face. He kept staring at her as he slowly turned her head to look up again. "I would have acted to protect my people," Shikamaru stated calmly. Temari smiled admiringly, his selfless attitude essentially translating into a resounding yes from him. Temari wondered what that would do to him, confident that the feeling of having killed for the first time, and killing a woman, would not be a positive occurrence for him. It felt strangely upsetting to her knowing the experience would practically destroy him. "May I ask you something else?" Temari asked, unsure if she was infringing on something most shinobi outside his clan were unaware of. Shikamaru replied calmly, as if she hadn't asked the previous question. "How did you detect me, for that hour when we met?" she asked, relieved that nothing had been breached when he calmly looked at her. "Your shadow told me," he smiled. "What?" she inquired, perplexed. "The Nara clan have been using the shadows to our advantage since our creation, dating all the way back to the founding of Konoha," he said, covering his mouth for a few seconds as he yawned. "We learned that just as the shadows can help us, it can also speak to us. We call it the shadow detection technique. It can allow us to sense and overall identify a person through the sole use of their shadow being near to our." "Does it require a lot of chakra?" she inquired, suddenly intrigued by Nara's abilities. He grinned at her question, hoping to pique her interest. "Barely. And I don't have great chakra stamina anyway," he said, unmoved, before continuing. "When we cross a shadowed area, we tag it, so to speak, making it part of our own personal detection network," he said, looking back at Temari, who had her mouth slightly open and her eyes wide. "Now I have a question," he said from his lying position, looking at her. "Yes, when we met, other than being opponents from different villages. Why were you so aggressive towards me?" Shikamaru asked, slightly uncomfortable for wanting to ask this after getting her wondering about his abilities. Temari looked at him calmly at first, then sighing and wondering if she should tell him. "My life has not been as comfortable as you Leafnin take for granted," Temari explained slowly. "Would you like to elaborate? Are you sure you want to hear it? It can be quite upsetting at times." He gave it some thought before nodding. Alright, I was born, and told him everything, all the different doctrines Suna had, all the different types of training, going into detail about her father's definition of the words survival and training, and some, but not all, of the different things Gaara had done relating to her, including a lot of near misses. She looked at him after finishing, looking at the sky, trusting him not to have fallen asleep during any part of her life. The look of horror on his face made her slightly uneasy. She even noticed that the blood had drained slightly from her face while looking at the sky and finally sitting up, his expression remaining unchanged. "Kami," he murmured, not looking at her. "You had nothing to do with it. It's in the past and thus forgotten," she sympathized, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Kami," he said again, slowly turning to face her and looking at her with sad eyes. Then he did something she wished he hadn't done. He quickly drew her into a hug and whispered in her ear, "I'm so sorry." She chuckled lightly. "Shikamaru, it's fine really." Finding she couldn't speak anymore, her throat suddenly clogged and tight. Her eyes stinging uncontrollably, she found herself unconsciously wrapping her arms around him tighter. She didn't know what to think. To show pain was to show weakness, she had been taught. But Shikamaru didn't seem to care, she cried bitterly into his shoulder. She wasn't sure if she was doing it right. She had never cried before. But she cried now, and all the agony she had endured but ignored came flooding back. Having no emotional support from siblings, caregivers, or senseis throughout her life, he could tell she needed it. Literally, Shikamaru winced slightly in pain as a result of her grab, but he decided to ignore it for her for the time being. Troublesome woman, he thought with a smile. He wasn't sure what he was doing when someone tells you something terrible happened. You don't just reach out and hug them He wondered why he was making the effort now. I'm not sure how long they embraced, but they held each other. He was offering whatever emotional support he could to a guy. When she finally let go, she frowned and looked ahead, her cheek wet, not looking at his face. "Do you feel better?" he asked, gently placing a hand under her chin and turning her head towards him. Her eyes, despite being watery and red, retained the fiery, beautiful, domineering, and troublesome woman he adored what? Moving her hand down slowly with her own, she drew her arm back at the elbow and punched him on the shoulder, which appeared to be quite relaxed on her part, before moving to hold her legs with both arms, her face unmoving as she looked ahead again. Shikamaru wasn't doing so well he had to bite his bottom lip and summon all of his manhood to keep from screaming like a little girl at the punch. "Holy Mother of God," he mentally screamed and whined, placing his left hand slowly on his shoulder in a casual gesture that appeared to be an itch. After he had mentally screamed enough, he decided he needed to see how built she was, because she could probably break bricks with that punch, she could probably put full-grown men to shame, she could kill a charging. He paused again wait what did he just say? Did you notice how well built she was? A slight blush on his face caused him to move his head away. However, it appeared to be held in place for some reason, as she placed her surprisingly soft fingers on his jawline. Temari moved in closer and kissed his cheek slowly and wetly before letting go and standing up, collecting her fan. "Thank you, Shikamaru see you around," she said calmly as she walked away, not looking at him. He was kissed he was kissed. Slowly moving his hand to his right cheek, he simply enjoyed the warmth it left on his face. Ignoring the searing pain in his most likely shattered shoulder, he found forgiving her a very simple task. The next time they met in the house, they avoided eye contact and generally treated each other as friendly as they could without being too obvious. She because she didn't want his parents to know, and he because he knew she knew his parents didn't and shouldn't know. That little rule reinforced, or so they thought, by Temari's next act of interest. His parents were downstairs getting ready for a meal, and his mother asked him to go call her. Shikamaru went to investigate after not receiving any responses, and not finding her in any room. He assumed she had left on alliance business. He entered his room after hearing a small tinkle and wondering why his clock was going off early only to hear the door close behind him. As he turned around, he noticed Temari, a frowning, stern-faced Temari, which didn't bode well for him. "Temari?" he asked tentatively as she approached slowly and suddenly grabbed his front of his shirt, roughly pinning his hands on his wall with hers and her surprisingly strong upper body strength, looking at him intently. "Is there something?" he started before she grabbed the majority of his jaw and said harshly, "Shut," pulling him closer, up crashing her lips on his, making his head bang hard against the wall behind him. But like before, the pain subsided before it even began this time. Completely he seemed to vaguely notice it seemed like all the world's joys, beauty, pleasure, and happiness finally made sense to him. Now understanding what his father said about women. Temari, on the other hand, was looking for an answer to an experiment. When she kissed him on the cheek earlier, she noticed she blushed so much that she had to turn away. So, just to be sure, needless to say, the real kiss was a true breakthrough. It also turned out that he was a fantastic first kisser. Not that she would ever tell him that, but she could at least keep it to herself. He was soft, sweet. And quite addictive if Temari did say so herself, and above all, hers. Finally finished kissing, they were still holding each other, her arms around his neck, his hands around the small of her back, looking deeply in each other's eyes. Before Shikamaru looked towards the door and chuckled, "This is going to be so troublesome," he said, looking back at the woman in his arms who gave him a sly smile. "You better believe it." Her smile turning into a frown again, bringing him closer so they were face to face. Yoshino and Shikaku looked up from the kitchen at the ceiling, puzzled by the silence that followed the loud thud. They exchanged a knowing look and smile. Before Yoshino said, "I don't think I would mind having her as a daughter-in-law. I thought it was really sweet when she called Memem that one time." Smiling affectionately, sipping her tea, bringing a laugh out of Shikaku. "Neither does Shika apparently, even if it is just a kiss," he said, smiling before his wife smacked him on the back of the head. "Don't spy on them," she said quietly, through he knew what her father was like as a tactician, favoring the bloody sacrificial attrition approach, having fought in the battle for Konoha against Suna and Sound before they had peace. "Hopefully Shika can help her change further," Shikaku said with a slight grin, his wife smiling at acknowledgement. In the aftermath, it appeared that they were not as subtle as they had hoped, walking hand in Konoha's grass plains after yet another intense make-out session. But letting go as they entered the village, they seemed to overlook the lipstick on Shikamaru's lower lip, which was of course noticed by Ino, who somehow managed to put two and two together. Temari laughed as he labeled Ino as a dumb bimbo incapable of intelligent thought other than "I realized I can throw up while dieting to lose weight," she said in a mock Ino voice. However, much to Shikamaru's chagrin, Temari had an outspoken opinion and decided to deliver it to Ino's face. The resulting cat fight resulted in Shikamaru receiving a number of scratches from both females as they wanted to, simply put, claw each other's eyes out. But that was nothing compared to his subsequent visit to Suna. Shikamaru had been sent as Konoha's political representative to the village hidden in the sands. He was unlucky to discover that he quickly became popular among their population. Their female population, that is, who flocked to see the mighty and skilled shinobi their most famous and powerful Kunoichi had chosen as a boyfriend. They were initially perplexed by Temari's choice, but as she demonstrated, he was completely worth it. She stretched her arms back and, apparently by accident, snagged onto his hairband and removed it in front of a large crowd of genin, chunin, and jounin-leveled kunoichi, who stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed at his features, resulting in a mass outbreak of severe blushes, nosebleeds, and deeply Shikamaru, who decided not to bother fixing his hair and seemed to ignore the swarm of females staring at him with flirtatious interest, looked around. This, of course, led to Temari asserting her dominance over him by kissing him hard in public, making all the kunoichi look at Shikamaru as if he were a prize worth breaking bones for, which, according to Temari, some did later on. Temari explained that Suna women fighting brutally amongst themselves, not to kill of course, but for some prize was quite common. Apparently she was right in the middle of the rumble, according to the bruises on her face. Shikamaru quickly realized Suna girls were not like Konoha girls. While Suna had removed the late Cage's murderous training regime, the training was still designed to increase endurance to ridiculously high levels. Bumps, scratches, torn skin, broken fingers, and the odd missing molar were still common, though he himself, after a fair number of passionate kisses, knew Temari's teeth were perfect. The training resulting in all of Suna's kunoichi to all being quite built and weather-beaten if use of a better word, but each looking like Amazons thin and developed as their ages could be. But Shikamaru realized few Suna women. Shikamaru thought tiredly, rolling his eyes and shaking his head, causing his now free hair to move slightly, causing a few of the younger girls and kunoichi in the crowd to faint. Suna's male shinobi were oblivious to the fact that nearly half of their civilian and fighting population had developed an interest in a foreign boy. As a result, Jounin Shinobi, the most outspoken and previous heartthrob, challenges him to a fight in their famous dipped arena. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and yawned before adding troublesome, making the spectators roar in excitement of his fearlessness. Temari smiled knowing he was just being himself. Shikamaru ducked the older man, who was about 7 years his senior, as he sent his fist at him, then backhanded the man in the face before moving behind him, grabbing both arms and twisting their wrists, sending the Suna shinobi down to the ground squirming in pain. Shikamaru looked lazily at the other men who had flocked to see his defeat, each of whom had become deeply fearful and avoided this shinobi who appeared to perceive the future. Not that anyone corrected them. And all of whom had become fearful of Konoha itself. Temari grinned broadly when Shikamaru told her this, and with another sweet kiss in front of many, he made all his troubles vanish. But the true test came when he ran into her brothers again. Gaara looked indifferently at the lazy Chunin, Shikamaru looking back with stoic boredom, remembering what he had done in their first Chunin exams together, unsure how to treat him. Kankuro, on the other hand, was a different story entirely. After discovering the lazy Chunin's interest in Temari, he felt it was only necessary, if not logical, to go kick the said lazy Chunin's ass to help re-establish certain village boundaries. Like tongue wrestling with his older sister. Kankuro had challenged Shikamaru to fight inside the same arena he had fought earlier. The fight, if you can call it that, was fairly one-sided at best, with Kankuro using only his fists because he didn't want to kill the leaf with his puppets, thinking the younger shinobi to be an easy combatant, regardless if he had defeated the previous Suna favorite. He was the better. Shikamaru simply put his hands in his pockets as the Suna shinobi in black and makeup attacked him. Temari stood on the sidelines, in front of a large crowd gathered to watch, completely confident in what was going to happen. Shikamaru sidestepped, ducked, and in short evaded everything Kankuro threw at him, without ever having to force his hands out of his pockets. Kankuro soon resorted to using a few shuriken and explosive tagged kunai when he got really pissed off, not that it helped. Shikamaru, still with his bored expression, grabbed the side of Kankuro's arm, as Kankuro punched again, twisting his wrist, bringing the Suna shinobi sprawling onto the ground in pain as Shikamaru stood over him. A sharp sound followed, the drawing of a kun. To make the message and the defeat even more painful, Temari kissed the lazy nin right there and then, while Kankuro watched from the flat of his back, disgusted at the scene and resentful of losing. After Shikamaru demanded to know how he won, the leaf shrugged and explained, "You're really predictable," resulting in Shikamaru sparring with the puppet user nearly every time they met. The victory over a member of the most famous noble family, the Sabaku, naturally increased the Suna Kunoichi population's efforts to attract his attention. A large group of 23 Jounin Kunoichi loudly wolf whistling and slowly licking their teeth and lips at him as he passed them, some of whom shamelessly, even making odd and enticing gestures at him, all of which seemed to happen a lot when Shikamaru went to visit Temari and Suna over the years, not that he ever paid any attention to them. He was pretty much set for life. And as far as Temari demanded that Gaara give her a mission to travel to Konoha after learning he had turned Jounin. She was filled with rage when he declined, but she was overjoyed when he explained that Shikamaru was already on his way to them. The males cowered at the thought that he had increased in status at such a young age, and each suddenly desired long missions away from Suna for the duration of his stay. The females, on the other hand, celebrated and waited eagerly for his arrival, and stood in awe of the knowledge of him receiving his Jounin rank. Shikamaru was slightly perplexed by the titanic welcome he received, but didn't seem to notice it when he saw Temari at the twin rock-gated entrance. Temari charged at him, tackled him to the ground, and made out with him before he could wince in pain. The large crowd of Kunoichi wolf whistled in delight at the sight, cheering on their favorite couple. Temari asked him how he got his rank, and he replied, admiring the slight change in his costume, now wearing a black long-sleeved shirt under his Jounin jacket. It was really predictable, he said loudly, a grin on his face, making the host cheer even louder at his ability. And really troublesome, he said to her, still smiling, making Temari grin even wider. She listened intently as he later described it to her in private. A brutal and grueling battle between a S-ranked Jinjitsu, Taijutsu, and Ninjutsu opponents. Even hearing that he had fought the Hyuga genius during the finals. Both became Jounins, but it was Lazy who came out on top with a spectacular victory, making her nearly unconscious with how attracted she was to him at the time. If slightly irritated that he outranked her. But soon after, joy turned to sorrow. It took some time for Temari and Suna to receive a letter from Konoha. The Akatsuki had arrived in the Fire Country, accompanied by a team comprised of Sarutobi Asuma, 2 other Chunin, and the knowledge that made her heart beat painfully in worry. Shikamaru Nara. She kept reading the official correspondence, gasping in horror at how 3 weeks late it was. But, according to what she read, his sensei had been killed. And Shikamaru was still alive. She breathed a sigh of relief, but was saddened by the loss of the man who Lazy looked up to as a role model and best friend. As she read, a week after his sensei's death, Team 10 left to hunt the Akatsuki, causing Temari to panic once more. Damn lazy, she exclaimed angrily. But they won, with Shikamaru destroying one, the immortal hidden who killed Asuma, and Naruto destroying the other, the long-aged Kakuzu, leaving her even more in awe of the two. An immortal, she was taken aback. A few hours later, she asked Gaara to send her to the Fire Country, and she was grateful when he agreed, but she insisted on Kankuro accompanying her. She knew the threat had passed, but she couldn't stop worrying about him. After a few days of traveling to Konoha, the sentries welcomed her, and she decided to abandon Kankuro, who didn't know the way to the Naras. Yoshino greeted her sweetly, explaining that Shikaku had gone on a short mission while her son sat in the garden. She discovered him outside some sliding doors. She walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his neck and gently kissing his cheek, all alone, looking at a shogi board, the pieces set. "Hey there, lazy," she said sweetly into his ear. "Hey, troublesome woman," he said quietly, his voice hollow in comparison to what it was normally. She moved slowly to the other side of the board, and he moved a piece, slowly responding. "So how are you doing?" Temari inquired, moving another piece. Shikamaru sighed and smiled. "Not bad. I did what I needed to do. I mourned him a lot, and now is the time for me to think about my own future," Shikamaru said calmly. Temari grinned. "Nice to know." Temari smiled affectionately before continuing their game. "So, I hear," she began. Shikamaru searching. "You defeated an immortal?" Temari asked, awestruck, knowing that an immortal shinobi with Akatsuki-like abilities must be a dangerous foe. "Yeah, nothing we threw or did could kill him. So I buried his still-alive head in one of the Nara forests," he explained calmly. Temari erupted in laughter. "Did you bury his head?" Temari exclaimed, surprised. "Yeah, he couldn't do anything when he was headless, so." Shikamaru cut his throat with a short cutting motion with his thumb. "It serves the jackass right," she murmured quietly, her smile fading slightly. "Temari?" Shikamaru inquired, noticing her waning expression. She leaned over and kissed him passionately before returning to her seat. "Don't put yourself in situations where your life is in danger, or where I can't come quickly and help you, dumbass," she frowned. "I owed him, and do you think I would have risked you fighting him if you weren't a troublesome woman?" Shikamaru said with a smile. Temari remained silent and moved another piece. "I don't want anyone I care about getting hurt. Not again," Shikamaru said quietly, reaching out and gently caressing her cheek, causing her to blush slightly. Temari was pleased that he was happy again before they continued their game. After passing the second Chunin exam Konoha held a few years back during the unexpected lull, she had passed with flying colors, brutally thrashing the rock nin who she had to fight against in the final. It was hard. Earth had a huge advantage over wind. But that didn't help him. After working out how to control the direction the wind blew, she struck hard from behind. "Oh well," she reasoned, "it was bound to happen eventually." And from there, we're brought up to speed. Looking back on it in Shikamaru's unconscious form, I'm slightly irritated. "Why don't you wake up?" she yelled, pulling her fist back and smashing it through a picture frame hanging on the wall, embedding it an inch into the wall, before pulling and twisting it out, ignoring the obvious torn flesh on her hand, as well as several cuts and throbbing pain. She noticed something else. "You know, some people are trying to sleep, Databeo," a voice to her right said. She didn't have to turn her head to see who it was. Who else used the word databeo in a sentence? She humphed at the thought of ruining someone else's beauty sleep. "I don't need any help right now, Naruto," Temari stated bitterly. "Really?" Naruto inquired, reaching into his pouch and tossing something under Temari's arm. Naruto made her see the extensive damage for herself by catching it with her right hand, which turned out to be a roll of bandages. She smiled back at him. "I guess some things are more important than others," she said, wrapping her blood-splattered hand, motioning to the dent in the wall. "Yeah, you, me, and everyone in the hospital." Databeo, Naruto, and Temari both laughed quietly before he looked at his longtime friend. "Has anything changed?" Naruto observed Shikamaru. "Yes, he's all better, so to celebrate, he fell asleep again, and I chose to express my happiness by busting my hand punching the wall," she sarcastically said, flexing her now covered hand and raising her brow at Naruto. "He is a precious person, so I have to ask." She looks at him. "You know what that means, a precious person, right?" Naruto said, unaffected by the implied insult, looking at her in a way that reminded her exactly what that meant. Temari looked at Shikamaru again, recalling all their previous encounters, their meeting, their attraction, the new feelings she had for him, and all their little adventures in between. "I know." Temari's voice broke, but somehow, she forced a smile on herself.
So this was it for today. I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.